This podcast belongs in a museum.
Starting the podcast.
Welcome to Franchise Flicks. My name is Ted, and joining me are my co-hosts Andy and Zach. On this podcast, we task ourselves with watching movie franchises, breaking them down, and reviewing them, including franchises we've seen and love, as well as franchises we've never seen and frankly avoided. Today we're talking about the Indiana Jones series, the iconic action-adventure movies that feature a heroic nerd who likely has as many STDs as he does historical treasures. This franchise includes 1981's Raiders of the Lost Ark, 1984's Temple of Doom, 1989's The Last Crusade, and 2008's Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. With that, we usually like to start these episodes with talking about our experience level with these franchises. So, Andy, why don't you start off with your experience level and what you think about these franchises on the whole?
Yeah. Thinking back to when I would have first watched these would have been, maybe young, not super young. I'd say like 8-10 years old, maybe that range, watching TV, things like that. Because they would replay, on, I think like Spike TV was the channel, TNT, right? Things like that. So watching them as a kid. Going back through this time, though, and watching them, I think it was the first time I ever watched the first one the whole way through. I think I've only seen bits and pieces of it ever on TV, and I never watched it. All the other movies, I'm pretty sure I've watched them in their entirety. Maybe not the full cinematic cut. I think more of the TV cut, again, watching them on TV. And then I do remember seeing the Crystal Skull sometime after it had come out in theaters and seeing in its entirety. So it was kind of cool to, for the first time, actually, sit down and watch the first one, because at that point I don't think I'd ever seen the full version of it. I'd seen maybe a few clips of it on television and just never finished watching it.
Imagine the only thing you know from Indiana Jones being that guy's face melting.
Oh, dude, we'll talk about stuff like that.
The only thing.
Is that your experience level? All of it?
Yeah. I can't say I'm like a huge Indiana Jones fan. These aren't really my type of movies because it's more I'm not an action adventure, and this is action adventure in a very niche version of it, kind of serial comic almost like. So yeah, that's kind of it with me and Indiana Jones.
Yeah, if you don't like action adventure, you definitely don't like Indiana Jones. That's pretty much what it is. But I guess so. My experience level with Indiana Jones is pretty minimal prior to us doing this this franchise for the podcast. I think maybe I saw Raiders once, but I didn't remember it at all. And so this was my first time through the whole franchise, frankly. And to me, it was, I had really high hopes for the franchise, and it wasn't as memorable as I had hoped it would be. It wasn't as, I hyped it up a lot in my head just because of, the pop culture implications. And it just wasn't as memorable to me as I had hoped it was. So I kind of am in Andy's boat where I don't like the serialized adventure of the week type, series as much. And so this didn't really appeal to me as much as I had hoped it would. But that's really about it. I mean, I think I liked the adventure aspect of them, but very, very serialized, kind of in your face, kind of like rinse, wash, repeat, wash, rinse, repeat, just the same thing, for each and every movie. So, but anyway, that's my overall thoughts.
Yeah, I'm in a very similar boat to you guys. I think I'd seen Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I'd only seen it in full very recently. I just decided to watch it because it was on Netflix before we even decided to choose this as a topic. But before that, the only one I'd seen in full, unfortunately, was Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I saw that in theaters with friends, and I didn't think it was great at the time, but I didn't realize necessarily how bad it was compared to the other ones, just because I didn't really have much context. I just thought it was an okay movie, but I really only had context for Indiana Jones as far as just a pop culture icon and knowing a lot of the pop culture references, whether it's the boulder rolling behind him or I knew the monkey brains thing from Temple of Doom, but I had never seen it. So little things like that where I'd seen homages to it and other things. But yeah, I'm not really a big fan of the serialized action adventure movie. I'm okay with that in the TV show as long as there's maybe a little bit of a through line with progressing characters. But it feels weird for a movie series where you're just jumping right into the next adventure, and it's pretty much the same format for each one, just with a few different characters and maybe a little bit of a different situation. But overall, I thought it was a decent series. But I was kind of where Zach was too. I hyped it up a little bit, knowing that these were George Lucas, Steven Spielberg movies. Especially being Star Wars fans like we are, I thought there was going to be more of a through line in these movies than there was. So I was a little disappointed that there wasn't, but once I kind of got clued into how this series was going to go, I adjusted my expectations for it and kind of just went along for the ride. And it was a pretty fun one overall.
Yeah, I think what makes this franchise maybe not my favorite franchise, even reflecting on it from the point of view of not growing up with these movies, not being the type of film, but in particular, Indiana Jones, it's really hard to get invested in this franchise because there is no major through line like we get in Star Wars. You were just following Indy on each of these adventures, and there are certain things and elements that carry on from one movie to the other, but it's not the same. It's a different, we'll talk about characters later, but like it's Indy featuring, X, Y, and Z in every movie versus Star Wars. We'll compare it to another Lucasfilm franchise where you see the same characters, repeat themselves in each of these movies. Sometimes even spanning, decades in cases with the prequels and the original trilogy and the sequels. So I think that part makes me personally not be as invested in as other franchises.
Yeah, I agree. And I will say it was a lot of fun to watch it. I feel like I always start with the negative, but it was a really fun series to watch overall. So I had a good time with it. But I think you're right. I mean, the investment level was relatively low for me throughout the whole thing. And I'll be honest, I feel like there's a lot of missing exposition in a lot of it too. I think they did a good job in Raiders, but then in the subsequent films, it kind of just relied on Raiders for your understanding of Indiana Jones as a character and basically nothing else. And then there was no, exposition throughout the movie plots after Raiders. So that was a big thing for me. Like why do I have to care about Willie or Short Round in Temple of Doom? They don't mean really much of anything, and there's really no exposition to tell you. So
I know I didn't care about them at all. And like the only attempt they really give at a backstory or anything is really in Last Crusade at the very beginning with River Phoenix playing a young Indiana Jones. And it's really more of a montage of how can we fit all of the origin story of how he gets his stuff into the first 5 minutes of the movie. How does he get the whip? How does he get the hat? How does he get his scar? And how does he get his fear of snakes?
It's the origin of fan service.
Yeah, and it's all the real burning questions that people had too. So they were really on top of it as far as what people wanted out of these. Yeah, I didn't care about any of that, and it was just a sorry attempt at providing any kind of backstory, especially when it all happens within the same sequence. It's just crammed in there. It was lazy writing, and they probably shouldn't have even attempted to do it because these movies just don't thrive on that. They thrive on the fact that it's just one adventure to the other, and I actually would have been more okay if they scrapped that whole part of it.
Something I thought like throughout this whole franchise is like constantly making comparisons to Star Wars, but in particular the sequel trilogy as well as the Han Solo movie, because like Raiders not Raiders. I always get the titles confused. The third one,
Last Crusade.
Last Crusade. That one, the beginning of it, that whole intro thing feels like Solo, a Star Wars story. Like, remember this little thing? Remember, this thing that happened to explain the character? Well, we're telling you how it happened. But instead of being like a 2-hour movie, this was like 20 minutes. And I don't know if that made it better or worse. So
Right. It was like still long, but not like a full movie. It's way too long for what it was, but thankfully not a full movie.
you explain so much in that sequence. Hold on, can we just break this down before like we get into something? Like, this explains the whole franchise right here.
Yeah,
Here's Indiana Jones.
Here's a chase. Here's Indiana Jones.
His daddy issues, which like factors into his psyche and like the way he treats women, and like all these things comes from this 20-minute sequence in the movie.
That one montage. Yeah, that's all Indiana Jones is.
It essentially is a montage, but it's filmed in the sense that it's actually events happening in real time. Like, obviously within the context. Yeah, within the context of the movie, it is like in real time happening that way, but it's just so ridiculous that they do it that way, and it just shapes his entire existence. Before this 20 minutes, he wasn't Indiana Jones, but now he's fucking Indiana Jones, and you know everything you need to know about him. The only thing he doesn't do in that sequence, and it's because he's probably underage at that point, is sleep with a very attractive woman.
And that could have happened off screen. We don't know.
Absolutely. We also don't know what he was doing with his chubby companion beforehand. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's right. He had a companion there too.
Oh yeah. Yeah, he had a companion who was out of his depth, just like usual. And yeah, it's just everything you need to know about Indiana Jones.
So with that said, let's talk about Indiana Jones. Let's talk about the plots of the movies.
Yeah, do you want me to give the quick little synopsis of each one?
Yeah, why don't you run it down and then we'll get into it.
All right, let's get into it. So, Raiders of the Lost Ark is an epic tale in which an intrepid archaeologist tries to beat a band of Nazis to a unique religious relic, which is central to their plans for world domination. Battling against a snake phobia, a vengeful ex-girlfriend, Indiana Jones is in constant peril, making narrow escapes at every turn in the celebration of the innocent adventure movies of the earlier eras. Temple of Doom is, again, an intrepid archaeologist, Indiana Jones, on the trail of fortune and glory in old Shanghai, is ricocheted. That's pretty accurate, actually. Like, he is literally just slung into this one. Into a dangerous adventure in India with his faithful companion Short Round, who comes out of nowhere, and nightclub singer Willie Scott, who also pretty much comes out of nowhere. Indy goes in search of the magical Sankara stone and uncovers an ancient evil which threatens all who come into contact with it. Last Crusade, the intrepid explorer. Tell me if you've heard that one before. Indiana Jones sets out. Oh yeah, it was Explorer this time. Yeah, but he is intrepid in every one.
Still intrepid.
He sets out to rescue his father, a medievalist who has vanished while searching for the Holy Grail. Following clues in the old man's notebook, Indy arrives in Venice, where he enlists the help of a beautiful academic. But they are not the only ones who are on the trail, and some sinister old enemies soon come out of the woodwork. And finally, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. It's the height of the Cold War, and famous archaeologist Indiana Jones, they use some different descriptors there, returning from his last adventure, finds out his job at Marshall College is in jeopardy. He meets Mutt, played by Shia LaBeouf, a young man who wants Indy to help him find the legendary Crystal Skull for seemingly no reason. And the pair set out for Peru. However,
There's a however?
Oh, yeah. Deadly agent Irina Spalko is searching for the powerful artifact too, because the Soviets believe it can help them conquer the world. So there's your synopsis. You can tell just from those. These movies are all pretty similar structure-wise, and it's just adventure after adventure.
I think there's something to be said about the leap of faith you need to take with each of these movies. It is and that's kind of to play off of what happens in The Last Crusade. But you have to kind of like accept them for what they are, and then you can enjoy them. I can't go into these plots and critique them like I might other type of movies that are out there. Otherwise, I'm not going to enjoy it. So I tried my best not to do that watching these movies, even though Indiana Jones as a franchise is not my favorite franchise. While I was watching each of the movies, I tried my hardest not to critique the things I didn't like. I acknowledged I didn't like it, and in my brain I kept going with the flow.
I use the word yikes a lot through all of this, you know. But that's what you got to do. You got to yikes it and move on.
Yeah, you got to yikes it. You have to accept the time period that it came out and the time period that it was trying to portray. So a lot of those yikes moments in the context of that, you're like, okay, fine, I can get over it. And if you accept them for what they are and you know what to expect going in, you can at least enjoy the parts of the movie that separate themselves from that. And that's really what you have to do with these, unless you're really into this type of movie. And if you are, congrats. Just not any of our cup of tea, it sounds like.
And if you look at the original trilogy, like, and I'll exclude the Crystal Skull for just a moment from this, thinking of like what those were trying to do, we already talked about like big picture wise that this franchise is like a serial, comic that you get. But it's really the second one, the Temple of Doom, that kind of like gives us that, because the first one is all about, all right, professor, artifact, Nazis get the artifact, they lose, Indiana Jones wins. The second one is similar beats, but not Nazis. Like it's a completely off track. It's not there. Indy is going on the mission. He's, as we noted, he's flung into it. This is not his choosing. This is like more of the moral story development for Indiana, where we affirm like the type of character he is. Very similar to The Last Jedi in a lot of ways. I made some comparisons in my head. And then we return back to The Last Crusade, which is very much like a parallel to what happened in Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's like, okay, Indiana Jones has a mission. All of a sudden, the Nazis show up. They get the thing. They do the bad thing with the thing. And then Indiana Jones ultimately wins in the end. Crystal Skull is kind of like an amalgamation of all those things happening. And instead of Nazis, it's the Soviet Union. But plot-wise, I think like after Temple of Doom, Temple of Doom, I think the IMDb, that's like the second lowest. And Kingdom of the Crystal Skulls, the lowest one. But it felt like a course correction going into Last Crusade, where they're like, okay, let's bring back the Nazis now. Let's stop talking about the native people and people of color. We're going to make the bad guys the Nazis again, because everyone hates Nazis, unless it's 2020. Then some people like them.
For sure. Well, I'll tell you, I didn't even know until after watching the Temple of Doom that it was actually a prequel to Raiders of the Lost Ark. I didn't realize that. Did you realize
told me that?
Yeah, it's a prequel. It takes place in 1935. Raiders takes place in 1936.
Oh my God! Whoa, mind blown.
Yeah,
mind blown. That changes everything.
So it like you were kind of describing how it kind of sets up like the Indy kind of moral character, his intentions, his convictions, right? And I think it does. I think they intentionally did that. Now it's questionable on how they execute and where they go for that, but because it was kind of weird. That was a very bizarre movie. Really, it wasn't even about archaeology. They just found a room.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, it was more of just a adventure of Mordor.
It felt like a Scooby-Doo episode where he finds the secret room, and then that's the rest of the movie is behind the wall of the secret room. Right. I don't know.
That just fucks me even more, because now I'm thinking like Shorty. My boy Shorty is like my favorite.
He's dead.
Yeah, what the fuck did Indiana
He's-
Jones do to that kid now? Like, he doesn't show up ever again. And that, I thought it was the second one. Okay, yep, like they did their buddy thing, and then like now he's living somewhere safe. No, Indiana Jones
Short
probably
Round
fucking
is dead.
got that kid killed.
No, he traded him.
He sold him on Wayfair. I'm pretty sure. I think.
Yeah. No, that was the most messed up thing that I could think of when I found out that this was a prequel. It's like, where the fuck did Short Round go? It was just a year ago.
Speaking of that, let's talk about like how these movies end. They always seemingly end happy ending wise with Indy with the girl. They seem like they're gonna be together after that, and especially in Temple of Doom, it's Indy and Willie. And then Short Round, like they all kind of have their arms around each other like they're a happy family. And then if this is a prequel, he's just gone. And so is Willie too. It's almost
Also
like
gone.
it's almost like after the camera stops rolling, he's just like, okay, I'm fucking out of here. You're on
But
your
then
own.
also Willie was gone, and Marion apparently has been. They've been around for years, and all of a sudden she's back in the picture. I just found that kind of weird too. Like, so it's a very strange timeline in the world of Indiana Jones, because it goes 35 is Temple of Doom, 36 is Raiders, and then it goes to 38 in The Last Crusade. So that's like more like Nazi Germany, you know?
Yeah.
I
it
just
makes
found that
sense.
interesting.
Yeah, it does change things, that's for sure. Maybe not for the better.
No, I don't think
makes it
so.
worse. I think it makes it
Yeah.
worse.
Yeah, especially with those implications. I mean, really, where is Short Round? When I was watching Temple of Doom at the very beginning of it, when Short Round was introduced, I was assuming that his Asian companion in the club was Short Round's father, and that he was going to have to break it to him that he died, just because I didn't think that this movie would not explain where this little boy came from who's driving cars and getting into these dangerous situations with Indiana Jones. But no, not the case. He's apparently just an orphan who hangs around with Indiana Jones and gets into terrible situations, which is super irresponsible.
He's badass, is what he is.
I
Short
don't like
Round.
him.
Short Round's my favorite.
He's
I
my
like Short
favorite
Round.
character. I
I love Short Round.
No,
Instantly.
I'm not on board.
I'm rooting for this kid in everything, and honestly, I want
No
him
doubt.
to come back in Indiana Jones 5. That's what we need. We don't need Shia LaBeouf to come back and reprise his, new role in the franchise. I'm good with him doing whatever other things he's doing with his life. Give me Short Round. He's picking up the mantle of being Indiana Jones. Now it's a person of color. It's an Asian person, even better. Big for the Chinese box office. Like, let's go. Bring me Short Round in Indiana
The
Jones
most
5.
important thing, the Chinese box office.
Yes.
That's what we need to worry about.
That's why
Well,
Mulan's
I
going to
want-
be $30, everyone.
I want Short Round to come back and kill Indiana Jones for leaving him in India.
What the
That's what I want.
Oh man.
You know, that's exactly what happened. Indy needed a plane ride out. And what was the only form of currency that he had?
Short Round.
Short Round.
All right, well, now that you've broken our minds with this being a prequel, let's talk about the movie though that sets this all up, which is the first one, Raiders.
Yeah.
And all of the tropes that happen in this plot, because it's you could really just break down the plot now by which trope is it. The first one is exploring through the jungle, finding the either cursed or something going on, booby trapped thing.
All right. Before you move on, I had a thought. Are these tropes in Indiana Jones, or did Indiana Jones create the trope?
Well, yeah, I think these movies within their own universe have their own tropes, and that's the only through line these movies have, is that Harrison Ford is playing Indiana Jones in all of them, and that all of them follow a very similar format, and it establishes its own tropes. We're talking about Short Round.
Yeah.
He's always got a companion with him who seemingly comes out of nowhere. and he almost always has a female companion with him, who he ends up sleeping with usually. There are so many through lines with these movies that there's always somebody in these movies, which I actually found kind of annoying, that there was always somebody that Indy knew in the movie and he talked very conversationally with, but we didn't know, but they almost acted like, the fuck, you don't know this guy? We know this guy. Every single movie, he's best buddies with whoever. And I remember the first time I watched Crystal Skull when I saw it in theaters. I think the guy's name is Mac, the guy who turns on him. I thought he was a companion who had been with Indiana Jones throughout all of the movies when I first saw it, because that's the way they acted in that movie. Like, that's how quickly this guy cycles through companions in these movies. Is it almost feels like you should know going into this movie who this guy is. Very weird trope that is. I don't know if you guys have any others you want to speak on.
Well, I think trope, yes, specific to Indiana Jones. There are some things that like are created from this, but I think more like broadly speaking, it like draws upon 1950s, 1940s, those like types of the same kind of things that George Lucas was watching. Like, what's I'm blanking on the name of the thing.
Well, I guess
like
I understand what you're saying, Andy.
But they're based on, so there are things that happen like in the Indiana Jones. I'm not necessarily talking about maybe those specific tropes yet. I'm saying like what this like sets up, and then maybe some of the specific ones too. It's like just going through like this, the first whole intro thing is straight out of like a comic book. Like you could watch, like they're going through the jungle, they find the temple, there's like all the booby traps. Like Indiana Jones didn't create booby traps. Like those have been around before. It's just the way that Indiana Jones maybe goes through those experiences is unique to Indiana Jones. But like those ideas, those are embedded in, you know, comics from the 30s and 40s and into like the films of that era too.
I agree with you, but I think to call them tropes, like I've seen movie tropes that draw off of Indiana Jones that from movies that were made
for sure
after Indiana Jones. And that's why I ask, like, is Indiana Jones using the trope, or are they creating the trope for future movies? Because I can't really, like, I haven't read any of those 50s, 40s comics. I haven't seen any of those 40s, 50s movies. I feel like Indiana Jones really is kind of that pathway that, like, they're the ones that kind of carved the path. Maybe they did draw on like, you know, they drew on those sort of, you know, features in those forms of media, but they're the ones that really popularized it, right? Am I wrong in that? Like, because I had that thought while I was watching. It's like, oh yeah, here they go doing the adventure. We're like, well, this is like the adventure movie.
Yeah, no, I think you're a little bit right on that, because they're old enough to where they definitely could have been the ones that established those things. And yeah, it's such a huge pop culture icon as far as these movies and the character of Indiana Jones that it almost seems like everything does draw upon it. So I think you're right. It seems like it's a little bit of both, where the idea of the format of which these movies are surrounded, just the action adventure serial part of it is where they take inspiration from. But everything else in these movies is something that it seems like Indiana Jones in Raiders of the Lost Ark, they establish, and then they just continue using throughout these movies. So yeah, I think
beyond the Indiana Jones movies.
Yeah,
too.
absolutely.
You know, like there's a million different movies that draw from Indiana Jones, and that's why I say I feel like even though Indiana Jones maybe didn't, you know, they weren't the pioneers of this type of story necessarily, you know, with the adventure, the damsel in distress, the companion, like that's definitely established. But they are kind of the ones that popularized it, and they're always like the reference point,
I think,
for those types of tropes.
I think that's just something we just grew up though as an artifact of the time, because these came out in the 80s. So think about like in the 90s now, when people our age today are talking about these things as if when they just watched those movies, which would be kind of like our parents. Like, it's just the zeitgeist. So for us growing up in like the age of like movie and story, these ones make sense for us to draw upon, to have those kinds of thoughts. But I don't think like Indiana Jones is like like you could sub out any I feel like 80s action adventure, and you're going to get something similar to Indiana Jones, because it draws on past elements that are the same thing. I think there are some things in the zeitgeist, such as like the ball rolling down or the boulder rolling down, that makes us think that Indiana Jones was like somehow groundbreaking in that way. It definitely, not to take away from anything that Indiana Jones has done, but a lot of these things I think have been kind of like repeated before. Indiana Jones didn't necessarily create it. It just brought forth it, continue on from past ideas and inspiration.
Right. Yeah. And I always feel like, you know, what makes it popular is really the more referential thing, you know, for future mediums, you know, and that's why I say, you know, none of us saw those. I mean, maybe you might have watched some of the, you know, the John Wayne movies or like some other, you know, cowboys, you know, movies, things like that. But, you know, Indiana Jones is really the ones that made it popular. And that's why I think a trope is something that is out there because it's popular, because it's repeatable, because it happens all the time. And I feel like Indiana is the one that really made it that way at least for our era, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's always a reference point.
Yeah. If it didn't outright establish it, it at least popularized them to the point that everybody said, hey, we got to do this in our action adventure movie, right? As an homage, and because this is just the best way to do it.
Right. And remember, it came out in 81.
Yeah.
Right. So that's early 80s. So then every movie in the 80s and 90s after that tried to emulate what Raiders did at the box office, frankly. You know, they're just trying to make a buck off of it.
Well, it's a Steven Spielberg film, so think about that too. Like, it's gonna carry some of the same types of things that are in all Steven Spielberg movies. I want to just pull up the list of movies that came in 1981 to see if, like, what was going on.
List them?
Yeah, Mad Max 2. Yeah, action adventures. You have...
speaking of Mad Max, we need to do Mad Max. I was thinking about that.
Yeah.
Clash of... Yeah, like, these are all types of... a friend is a treasure, time bandits, like, yeah, all these types of movies are very similar. Just happens to be Indiana Jones was the, you know, one of the biggest thing. Definitely.
So anyway, we went off on a big tangent there, but I think we talked a lot about Temple of Doom. For whatever reason, that's the one that sticks out to me in this series. I remember more of Temple of Doom than any other movie. And I think it's probably because it's like just a little bit different from the other ones, you know, where it's focused on like this dark, you know, ritualistic community, for lack of a better term. I can't find the word, but that darker side of humanity, that underbelly, you know, that not necessarily just evil, but like actual evil demon shit, you know, not just humanity evil. So I just feel like it stood out to me in that, because it's not like the archaeologist find the relic before the Nazis do, right? Which is the plot of the other two films outside Crystal Skull, which I'm ignoring.
Even how all the movies begin, like there's like some kind of adventure scene happens of some kind, and then we shoot, or like it goes back to Indy teaching. His class gets interrupted. He learns of like what the MacGuffin is that they're going after. Then he goes on the adventures. Turns out it's Nazis and or Soviets. When you throw in the Crystal Skull, and then rinse and repeat. Versus Temple of Doom doesn't do it. It does something similar, but not that. And we never see Indiana Jones back at the university. The movie starts and ends with the Indiana Jones not back home.
Maybe that points to Indy trading Short Round for a job at the university. We don't know that. But yeah, the Temple of Doom deals more with mystical elements. Not that all these movies don't, but it really is seeking out the relic that ends up being mystical in the other movies. But in this one, it was more everything surrounding the movie was very mystical, it seemed. And just from the beginning, when they crash the plane and then they're in the village and they're tasked with going on essentially the mystical quest to save that village, essentially. So it plays very differently than the other ones, because in the other ones it's seeking out a relic, but it's all with that kind of Han Solo level of non-belief in a lot of that stuff. Like, if you want to believe in that kind of thing, he knows the history of it, but kind of skeptical about whether or not it does something, which really doesn't make any sense after Raiders, I would say, because he's experienced enough, I think, to probably give the benefit of the doubt that there are things that can't be explained in this world, at least within this movie.
In Raiders, as Temple of Doom is a sequel.
Yeah,
or a prequel.
Yeah,
rather.
no, that's what I'm thinking now. Like, there's
Yeah, with that knowledge, but even just going in, if you're not even equipped with that knowledge, which I don't think many people really are, even people who are big fans of this series.
It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, but yeah, just the skeptical nature of him, almost like he's Han Solo talking about the Force, is kind of funny to me. Just a little side note on that. Yeah, so it does have a little bit different of a feel, and definitely also in the scope of who the villain is, it's more a group of people who are indigenous and exotic, as opposed to people like the Nazis and the Soviets that, at least in the eyes of Americans at the time that these things are set in, are evil, just pure evil, and they're out for evil gains. Everything else in Temple of Doom seems to be, this is just a society doing what they do, and Indy's disrupting that, kind of.
Yeah, in a way, definitely. I mean, he's definitely still the hero that comes in to stop the evil, but it's like like a literal evil, like a spiritual evil, not a humanity
a political,
evil.
Governmental sort of thing.
Gathering power over the entire world.
Right. I think that's the only movie that doesn't involve like a government contract. You know?
Right.
Except that this does deal with like what's going on in India and being under the rule of the British Empire, and what that's kind of caused with like it kind of like a shadow government almost, because technically, like, yes, the empire owns, but this is, Britain owns India, but really who's running India are these people, and we see the emperor, right, and his prime minister, who turns out to be the bad guy. So like it kind of does, but it's in a different way, which reminds me so much of The Last Jedi. Like, to compare, even though it's not a sequel movie, being a prequel movie, which takes the bigger picture story and kind of like makes it a little more intimate, where we learn about why the character is the character he is, the kind of what I referred to before as like kind of like the moral journey of the character. That's what happens is this, similar to like The Last Jedi, how each of the characters are tested and they go through like, all right, what kind of character do they want to be by the end of this movie? And we get Indiana Jones at the end of this, which I thought was a sequel until a few minutes ago, affirming who he is. But really, it's who he becomes is Indiana Jones. Later retconned by the Last Crusade, because we learn that Indiana becomes that character in 20 minutes on a train chase and a horse and shit.
And retconned for the better, I think, right?
Guys, we have really not paid any attention to the Last Crusade or Raiders. Anything in particular that stands out for you guys in both of those movies? Like, so Raiders obviously is the intro to Indiana Jones going after the literal lost ark before the Nazis get it. I mean, that's like the plot. I mean, I don't know that there's really, like, it's a cool movie, and I think it's really fleshed out well, but I don't know that there's a lot that I can comment on compared to, Temple of Doom.
Well, I'll speak on some of the things that stood out to me, just some things that I liked about it. Like, the opening sequence I really enjoy, just because of the mystery at the very beginning of who Indiana Jones is. We only see him from the
cold
back.
open.
Yeah, it really is one of the best openings to a movie I've seen in a while. Just from the back the entire time, he's leading the way, but he's completely silent the entire time. Everybody behind him is very skeptical about what's going on and seemingly scared about what's going on too. And even when they do show his face, it's just a cool, calm, and collected guy who's an absolute badass who can use a fucking whip to take a gun out of a man's hand. And then when he's going through the cave, instead of going forward like anybody else would, not thinking about their surroundings, he nonchalant, like almost naturally thinks about, well, here's some light here. That's probably a trigger for a trap. Or when he's brushing off the tarantulas off of, I'm blanking on the guy's name. I don't even care.
Doc Ock.
Yeah, Doc Ock. Yeah, that's what we talked about earlier. Yeah, just stuff like that. And he never seems to be in over his head during that sequence until obviously he gets out and then he's surrounded by the tribesmen and Belloc. But like, what a cool intro to the movie and to the character too. Like, I think it, as far as these movies are concerned, because they don't dive too far into Indiana Jones beyond that, that really sets up Indiana Jones more than anything, I think. Like maybe a few things here and there later on, like him being a professor and then him being a total ladies' man, everybody gawking at him in the classroom. Most of what you need to know about Indiana Jones is just so succinctly told to you without him really even saying anything.
Without exposition.
And it's a really cool way to introduce a character.
Yep. Totally agree. Yeah, I think that's like here's what you can expect from Indiana Jones. And like that, they just put it, smacked it on the table. I agree. It was great.
Really good. Another thing I noticed, speaking of like tropes of this movie within these movies, is, and it was established obviously in this movie, a lot of the action scenes, and I really enjoyed this, are both really well choreographed action scenes with nice practical effects, but they also have a lot of slapstick involved. So a lot of that luck factor that occurs in a lot of these Indiana Jones movies is also comical, and it kind of takes the tension away a little bit, which is nice. Yeah. So it sets you up for more tension again. So it keeps setting up tension, grasping it away from you for a second, and then setting it up again, which actually lends itself to these action scenes being longer. Some of them do run a little too long, and we discussed this before the episode. Andy in particular mentioned that. But I really enjoyed them just from the level of execution and like the thought and love that went into those scenes, because not only is it an action scene, but it's not just a guy being a badass. It's that and him kind of stumbling around into all of this too, because that's exactly how it would go if somebody were doing this in the real world. They might not survive it like he does every single time, but there would be mistakes made every single time, I would think. And it really plays well to me.
Yeah, I think with this movie in particular of the franchise, my only issue with it happens later on in the movie. It's like I think it's the last 25 minutes. It's when they first get onto the boat, and from that point on, how we get to the end, it just felt like that was an unnecessary sequence, because we end up getting like right back to where we started, which is being captured by the Nazis when they're in Egypt, and they could have just had that whole situation happen right there. It just felt like we went through all of this already. We already, had it was like a slow moment after all these fast moments, and it just didn't feel right. The rest of it, plot wise, everything, like, it was fine. It felt like an 80s action adventure to me that I could appreciate and enjoy. Just didn't really like the boat sequence and how it got us to the end.
Yeah, I can agree with that. And I think where this movie did fall flat for me was kind of toward the middle to 3/4 of the way through the movie. It was just a lot of plodding along and kind of circling around until we get to the end of the movie, kind of like what you were saying, where, you end up in the same spot, but you started somewhere, you end up in the same spot, and you didn't really progress at all, but you put it in the movie, essentially. It seemed like it was kind of filling up a little bit of time. So I really enjoyed most of the beginning of the movie and most of the end of the movie. And the middle was a little iffy for me, but overall, I think it's the strongest movie of the series, and that is because all of these movies play off of what's established in the very first movie and just make a story based on that. So when you're watching the very first one, I think it feels more natural because it's the first time you're being exposed to all of this, and it is exciting to be exposed to it for the first time. When you see all the other movies, all right, I know what's going on. Indiana Jones is going on an adventure, blah blah blah.
Yeah, it's quick. It gets right into it. So I have a question for you guys. Who is your favorite companion? Who is your favorite damsel, and who's your favorite villain out of all of the movies in the franchise? So you've got Salah, right, is the companion in Raiders. You've got Short Round, my guy, Short Round in Temple of Doom. You've got Sean Connery in his dad,
Dr. Henry Jones.
Dr. Henry Jones in The Last Crusade, and then you got Mutt. You got Mutt in Crystal Skull.
I'd push back only that in The Last Crusade, it's not only his dad, it's actually the other guy too.
But it's mainly his dad.
Yeah,
we already got
mostly
Salah
his dad.
I would say look at the amount of time. I don't think that's true. I think like we surprisingly don't get a lot of time with Sean Connery.
I think we get more time with Sean Connery with Harrison Ford than we do his other companion who works at the university with them. That there's a lot of time where he's on his own.
You're talking
about him.
Brody, Marcus Brody. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
No, he's not the companion. It's his dad. He's the companion.
I say it's both of them. I'm not saying that it's either or. I'm saying it's both of them, and it's kind of like the most unique of the three in that regard, because you don't have like the single sidekick. Because the single sidekick is supposed to be like the one who like dim-wittingly helps the person, or like, you know, is there to like assist him. And his dad is like the MacGuffin to help them get to the next bit. And the dad ends up being like the thing that drives Indiana Jones to get the what's it called at the end, because like he needs the Holy Grail. He needs it to save his dad. So like, even though the Holy Grail is the MacGuffin in physicality, but like the driving part of that specific point is it's because of his dad. So his dad's less of a companion, more of a plot device.
I'd say he's both at the same time.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
I think he plays both roles, and I don't think you can put Brody as a companion though. He's more of a hurdle than anything.
Yeah, most of the movie, especially toward the middle of it, they're just worrying about whether or not he's alive, essentially.
Right.
Yeah, it's really only at the end of the movie and the very beginning, which Brody's at the beginning of Raiders too. He really just serves to help explain what the adventure is going to be to Indy.
But he goes on the adventure this time with him. He literally
but he gets separated for so long, and really he's only there at the end.
No, like I think if you look at the time.
You first.
I was just saying, if you look at the timing of this, like the amount of time that the characters are on screen with Indiana Jones, I think you're not giving enough credit to Brody of how much he's on the screen for him in the beginning of this movie and how long it is. It is a long time.
All right, I think that Brody's actually more like the T.J. Miller character in Deadpool. Like he's like your Alfred in Batman, right? Like he's kind of that Butler-esque. Here's your mission, you know.
I would say that in the first one, not in the third one. He
just gets wrapped up into it. It's just the sequel.
Well, just kind of like how his companions seem to get wrapped up in it, where it's like, oh, Indiana Jones is on this mission, but guess what? It's like
not Short Round. Short Round's in it from day one.
Well, that's why he's my favorite. Like obviously, like he's
the badass.
Okay,
Short Round's my guy. All right, so those are all the companions. And Mutt, right? We said Mutt. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So after that, we have the damsels, right? What I'm calling the damsels. I don't know what else to call
It's a little sexist, but that's fine.
I know. I'm sorry.
I don't know. The female lead in the movie.
Yeah, but they're more than the female lead. It's
love interest.
The love interest, I guess. All right, love interest. I guess I'm being more archaic. So we have.
You're very sexist.
We have Marion Ravenwood in Raiders. We have Willie in Temple of Doom. We have what I don't even know her name. I'm looking at Dr. Schneider in The Last Crusade, who again kind of dual role there, love interest / villain.
Kind of also a sidekick too. They're partnering it up. She's more of a sidekick.
No way.
A little bit toward the end, but I think
you're muddying the waters.
Oh, well, maybe this is why The Last Crusade is the worst of them.
That's
not true. I don't know. I think Temple of Doom or Crystal
Interesting. Okay.
All right, interesting. And then this is the last one. Marion again. All right, so we have so she's there twice, but we're gonna have two. I think they're two very different characters because I liked Marion in the first one. So
Can we say Mutt is also Marion? The love interest, because when he finds out that he's his son, he totally flips the script on how he feels about him.
Yeah,
definitely. So we'll separate those two.
Yeah.
Now, I'll be honest. The villains don't mean really anything to me. I think they were not much characters at all. But we'll that's just my opinion on the villains as a whole in this series. But we have Belloc in the Nazis in Raiders. We've got I don't even know who he is, but he's the devil guy.
Yeah.
In Temple of Doom. Well, he was the prime minister, right?
No, it's not that. It's two different characters. The prime minister's like with him though. He's one of the guys hanging out there.
Right. What was he? But he had another role, right? Like in the government or whatever?
No, you don't see him. You're thinking the prime minister and the like shaman dude or whatever. They're not the same person. The shaman dude. They're not the same person. They're two different characters.
Right. But they are both villains.
Yeah, they're both. I'd say like you get like they are both villains. I'm kind of like
villains.
What if we generalize it instead of saying like specific like villain? There are instances of it, but like you basically like Nazis part one, mythical secret cult people, Nazis part two, and they're led by what's his face, and then the Soviets, which is led by what's her name?
Irina Spalko. But yeah, that's kind of what I mean. I think the villains are completely irrelevant almost in these movies.
Yeah, they're almost faceless in a way.
Yeah.
Okay, so
right, you start.
Starting with companion.
Who's your favorite companion?
My favorite companion.
Who do you want? You're Indy. You're Indiana Jones. Who do you want with you?
I want Sala with me.
You want Sala?
Yeah, I think he's resourceful. I think he's a smart guy. He's also a pretty compassionate guy, and he is a good friend to Indy. I don't think he necessarily gets too much of a chance in Raiders to show what he can do, but I think he's a pretty helpful guy for the most part, and it shows when he shows up in other movies as well. He's a helpful guy that Indy trusts, and if you guys are going to argue Short Round doesn't come back. And technically, he's in the first movie chronologically, so I don't know. It says a lot about what Indy feels about Short Round, I think. What about you guys?
Right. I mean, first of all, you did Short Round dirty. But I want you to finish. Go down the list. I want you to finish yours first. Who's your love interest?
Yeah, but my favorite love interest, I gotta go with Marion. She's the strongest of all the love interests, both in physical prowess and as a character. I think she's just very strong-willed, and she's introduced by drinking this dude under the table, just an absolute machine as far as taking shots. And she holds her own in the bar fight with Indy. I think she shows the most value as a companion. It could be argued that she's a more valuable companion in Raiders than Sala is actually, while also serving the love interest role. But she does kind of get thrown into the damsel in distress role when she's kidnapped a bunch of times. Right. So it's almost like the movie has dual personalities for her. But I think overall she's a strong character, strong woman, and just strong person. And she's attractive too. So I get why Indy was with her. And then as far as villains, I'm going to go with Nazis Part 1 because my favorite part of the Nazis Part 1 is Belloc. I actually thought he was a decent individual villain as a rival to Indy, where it just ends up every time.
He's the only one.
He really is. He's really the only one who stands out of all of the main individual villains, because he's just the guy who's a step ahead in a way where he knows to just let Indy do his thing, find the relic, and then just ambush him and get the trust of the tribal people in the area. So it's just, he's always a step ahead. He's a very heady villain. And outside of his propensity to try to save Marion as seemingly a sex slave, I guess, is what he wanted her for in the end, he's a pretty good villain. And just the fact that he, like everybody in these movies, just won't shoot Indy in the head eventually when he doesn't need him anymore. It's a problem in all these movies, but since it is a problem in all these movies, I gotta say he stands out to me.
Comprehensive list.
Yeah. So we can just clarify though that Nazis aren't even really the bad guys because he's a French archaeologist.
That is
he's
true.
working.
He's just working with the Nazis. Yeah,
working with the Nazis.
Yeah. That is a distinction though.
So like he's different, like categorically, than the Nazis in the third one, because they are literally like the actual bad guys. They're not like
just straight up faceless Nazis, essentially.
Straight up faceless Nazis.
Well, except for the freaky girl.
And she transpires all categories. She's like an assistant. She's the love interest, and she's the bad guy.
Absolutely. All right, Andy, give me your list.
Oh my god. All right. Obviously, you got to go with Short. I don't know what you're talking about with Sallah. He's unreliable. Everything he does ends up like messing up in some way. Like he doesn't end up getting out without like somehow being either caught by the Nazis or something like that. Versus my man Short, who like he's getting out of everything. Like that kid drives a car and he's like fucking 7. Okay, he like I don't understand how you can say any other side character is better than he is. He sticks up for Indiana Jones, Dr. Jones to you. Okay, Dr. Jones to you. You don't call him anything else but Dr. Jones.
He stands up. I'll wait for my.
Yeah. I mean, you're gonna just preach, son. Like reflect on
he
this.
He stands up for Indiana Jones. He stands up to Indiana Jones.
Exactly. Like calls him a cheater. Yeah, in the car and up to sleep. Like I loved him. The scene while they're on the plane and whatnot. Like he comes up like, Indiana Jones, we got no more parachutes. Like I just like he's checking for it. What is Willie doing? Absolutely goddamn nothing. You got Short looking for parachutes. Like he is the best sidekick. I want a Short. He's
Hallelujah.
Like he's Batman. He's the Robin to the Batman. My man Short all the way. With maybe like a second being Mutt, only because I think he's misunderstood in poor Shia LaBeouf. So
nah.
I don't know.
Yikes to that.
He's not that bad. I seriously watched that movie again. I was like, what are people's problems with this? It's not that bad of a movie.
I'm not going to watch that movie again, and he's pretty bad.
All right, so love interest though, Marianne. All the other ones don't even count. And I'll even like include like later Marianne, because I teared up a little bit at the wedding scene, seeing them like come full circle, because I wish like she was the love interest in all the movies. Like I wanted her to be the Princess Leia to the Han Solo of Indiana Jones. Like I wanted her to come back. I like her as a character. I'm glad she came back for the third one or the fourth one. And then for the bad guys, this is tough. I didn't again like because they're all like kind of sucky to begin with. I'm just gonna go with the shaman and prime minister only because like they were like totally lethal. Like as opposed to like all the other ones, like the Nazis not killing Indiana Jones. They were ready to kill Indiana Jones. They tried taking out his heart multiple times. They don't got no bullets. They use magic to rip out his heart potentially. They take him over, like they turn him into a zombie slave. And then the prime minister dude, he's just got like a badass like essence to him. Reminds me a little bit of Tarkin, just the way that he's kind of like all about himself and his rank and whatnot or whatever. So that would be my villain.
Can I just give a quick rebuttal to you just smashing Sala. I'm really upset. He single-handedly saves Indy when he's in the bar surrounded by Belloq's guys with guns, because he sends his kids in. And
he sends the kids in.
Yeah, because he knows they won't kill the kids.
And that would have been Short. Short would have been one of those kids.
That was a big risk.
Short Round is already dead by the time Raiders is actually happening. Short Round is...
Sala's got some questionable judgment, if you ask me.
No, I think he knows his own people. I think he understands what they're going to do in that scenario. And he was right. He was absolutely right. And he saves Indy from that scenario. And Short Round, he's
saves him every scenario?
No, Short Round's annoying. I was waiting for him to die in this movie. I told Zach in another conversation that when they're on the dueling train cars in Temple of Doom, I was hoping they would rip him in half between them, because he was stretched to like the brink. And I'm like, are they going to do it? This would be great. I hope they do. Not a fan.
Short Round saved an entire race of children, basically on his own.
No.
There's no better kid. Better
we'll talk
sidekick.
about that later. I actually have problems with that whole entire sequence, but you can get into yours. We already know it's Short Round.
It's definitely Short Round for all of the reasons that we just talked about. Yeah. Short Round is my guy. I'm not going anywhere without Short Round. I'm bringing a deck of cards, and we're both cheating at poker together. That's what we do together. Me and Short Round. I'm Indy. And so, yeah, Short Round's definitely my favorite companion. I think he's a lot of fun to be with for the whole movie. He makes a really otherwise super dark movie. Like, he just gives it that kind of uplifting spirit when you need it. So I actually just think that him in that particular movie makes a lot of sense. So that's why I really like Short Round, cinematically. But then the love interest, I definitely like Marion. I won't say Marion because everybody has said Marion so far, but
that means you said Marion.
No, I think she for all of the reasons you guys say. I mean, she's a strong female character. She holds her own. She still has the dynamic relationship with Indy. I think in the fourth movie, she's just I don't know. I didn't really like her performance that much there, but I don't think it's the character's fault.
Yeah.
But Marion was fantastic. But I will say, I think out of this list, I'm gonna go with Dr. Schneider, because I think her character was just super, super dynamic. Like, she did a really good job at kind of playing the love interest, the villain, and everything in between, even to the end when she offers Indy the Grail, or wants she kind of comes back around to Indy. Like, she still kind of always has him on a string, always at arm's distance. So I think she's an interesting character. So to not say Marion, I'll say Dr. Schneider. Willie is awful. Can we just all agree on that?
Yeah, I could have done.
I agree on that, but I will say in her defense a little bit. I get why she's screaming in every instance that she's screaming, because she's dealing with a lot of fucking bullshit. And if I were in her situation,
he does suck, yeah.
If I were in her situation, just getting giant bugs and all these fucking terrible creatures all over me, I'd be in the same boat. I hate that shit. So I get it. She's painted as an annoying character, and she is inherently annoying, but it's almost a disservice to her, because they're like, hey, look at this annoying bitch in this movie. And it's like, no, Indy brings people into incredibly dangerous situations that nobody should be in, including children like Short Round. And it's just unfair to ask more from them than what they're doing, because she's seemingly just a normal person. She is annoying, though. So they play that up. But just saying in her defense, I get it.
He's annoying and frankly a little useless. Yeah, I didn't like Willie's character, but what's the next one? Oh, the villains. I think the shaman stuff is super cool. The Temple of Doom villains are definitely my favorite. I love that just the difference between, I think, the movies. the Nazis and the Soviet Union. It's kind of one and the same to me. It's I get the idea, but it's not all that interesting. Whereas the Temple of Doom villains were super interesting. I mean, like the literal pure evil of them. You know, the human sacrifice, the black religion, like that, just underbelly of humanity is just compelling, which I don't know is a good thing, but that's my choice. That's my choice.
I can respect that. Okay.
So, all right. I think that's good. I know a little bit more about you guys now.
Yeah, I wish I knew a little less, to be honest.
Ted,
short round.
You need to pick better friends. That's what I learned about you. Companionship is off.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to some I don't know, some tech stuff.
Well, yeah, we skipped over. Oh, okay. So yeah, I was gonna say we skipped over that sort of stuff. I also want to talk about the music
really skip
too.
over it. Yeah. So let's talk about. I mean, we've got, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes left. I think that's enough time for us to get through some like special effects and the practical effects in the music.
Yeah. Speaking of special effects and practical effects, I really enjoyed them. Ones that stand out to me are in Raiders when they finally have the Ark of the Covenant and everybody's getting shot by lightning and the Nazis' faces are being melted off and Belloc's head explodes. Love that. I love the blood splatter in the scene when Indy is fighting the super big Nazi dude. That's another kind of little trope in these movies. He always seems to be fighting a big guy, and the big guy dies from some environmental cause that's not necessarily Indy. It's just like Indy's aware of the thing being ready to kill him. And that happens in Temple of Doom as well. The guy he's fighting gets squashed by something I can't remember in the cave there. Yeah, I really enjoyed the practical effects. I guess like the only time they didn't really land for me practically, I guess, would be in Last Crusade. There's a lot of green screening Last Crusade, specifically when they're on chase scenes, and you can tell it almost looks like in Seinfeld when they're driving in New York City and they've got the green screen carscape behind the traffic.
That's right.
It looks that bad. And I think the special effects in Crystal Skull are mostly atrocious in a lot of the scenes where they utilize CGI. Specifically when we're talking about Mutt swinging from the vines with the monkeys. That's one that sticks out to me. I'm trying to think of it. A lot of it was rough.
You know what stood out to me a lot in that movie was but really, I mean, not a lot, but just that end scene with all the crystal aliens becoming the one alien, and then everything like that was a really long sequence with a lot of CGI, and it looked bad. Like I didn't think it looked good at all.
Yeah. CGI just doesn't fit with this series, especially how well they do the practical effects in the first three movies. And you're utilizing ILM. I just don't know how you can't go practical most of the time again in this movie, especially when you just don't need CGI. It's right. More in the realm of reality than something like Star Wars would be, where you need CGI at least for the vehicles and stuff with dogfights and stuff like that. Yeah, it just didn't feel like it fit. So, yeah, that's all I've got to say about effects. What about you guys?
One thing I did not remember about these movies at all was how like violent and gory they were, especially the original trilogy. Brutal. I think we get a 2008 movie. PG-13 means a little something different than in the 1980s. But like, there's blood splatter. I think the face melting scenes, obviously, like those stick out. But one that like really like struck a chord with me actually is in Temple of Doom when the shaman guy is falling from the bridge. They like have a frame where they have his head hit the side of the wall, and they add blood splatter. Like that was so unnecessary. You didn't need that in there, but they gave it to us, and that's the one that jumps out at me. But there was something early on too with Raiders of the Lost Ark that was like, wow, that's like really gory. There was a lot of blood. I was not expecting that.
Well, the opening sequence, you have you have the Doc Ock speared behind the wall.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. That was like, I was like, whoa. I forgot that was in this. This is a dead body, kids.
Right. There's a lot of that. There's a lot. Really, the first two, because I don't think there was a lot of that in The Last Crusade. I think it was really Raiders and Temple of Doom that really kind of exploited the. I say gore, but that's what it was.
It was gore
for that time. Yeah.
You don't get that.
Call out.
You don't get that today. And I think when you see, because it was 89 when
The Last Crusade was 89.
Yeah, so I think there might be something there related to, movie ratings or something that had happened.
Yeah.
That caused, because the only real, like, other than some gun violence that you see, you don't get the same kind of gore, and the only kind of like dead thing you really see than those bodies being shot is when the Nazi at the end, or he's a Nazi, whatever that dude is, where he ages and like he turns into dust, like. And that's not even gore. That's more just like horror kind of elements.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, like so that came out in 1989. It may have been a creative choice because in 1981 was the first one, and so by 1989, it's more. It's kind of like a family movie. Like you can take your kids that may have grown up with Indiana Jones to see it, or even even an 8-year-old if in that case. So that may have been like an actual choice for them to kind of leave out some of that stuff to make it more family friendly.
Yeah, probably studios noticed that was like what you needed to do.
Yeah, but I did notice that like there was a pretty noticeable difference that there was not that same amount of gore in The Last Crusade. But I mean, in terms of overall effects, I mean, I think the 80s effects were 80s effects. I mean, they did a good job. I think there's a lot of things in ILM that you can point out, like a lot of the miniature stuff was pretty cool, but not a lot to note because it was pretty grounded. I mean, especially special effects, and there's just not a lot to know outside of the Crystal Skull, which I'm trying not to talk about as much as possible because again, those special effects didn't really do it for me. There was a lot of CGI in that movie.
Well, and I think it's timing with it. It's a 2008 movie, right? And it tried to be bigger than I think what it could be for the time, which is what Lucasfilm likes to do. Is they push boundaries, and it just doesn't always work. It's the prequels kind of like a big miss. But thanks to that, it forced other studios to do more with CGI and make it better. Who knows what kind of impact the Crystal Skull had on the industry when it comes to that sort of thing, but maybe ILM was back there doing things that were pretty, groundbreaking, and we just don't have the expertise to know. But other people were like, oh man, that was, really good for XYZ reason. Yeah,
and I mean, it's easy to forget. It was still 2008. I mean, it wasn't like, a couple of years ago.
Yeah, maybe it looked better at the time. It just doesn't really hold up. You can tell when there's CGI and you can tell when there's not. And it just feels like two different movies visually when you're looking at it from that standpoint.
Well, when we've harped on this, but the practical effects in this, when they are very good, it's very jarring with a CGI effect that happens later.
Right, because the practical effects are really good.
Yeah.
Like throughout all of it and through the whole franchise, they're great. So I agree. I think that the special effects stand out more because of that. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Do you guys have any more thoughts on that? I don't think there's a lot to talk about there. It's not like The Matrix where there was like, a ton of special effects.
Yeah, there's not much to talk about. I think the practical effects are pretty even through the first three movies, and then Crystal Skull just sticks out like a sore thumb, and that's pretty much all there is to it.
Yeah, no, I agree.
All right, should we
want to talk about John Williams?
Yeah, John Williams. Yep. This was something like I knew John Williams wrote the music for it, but I don't think I ever tried to pay attention to it when watching the movie. And I purposely did in this case because of not maybe our lack of discussion with music, but like how it was not a very positive discussion with The Matrix. We didn't really like all of the things that were happening. But I love John Williams' score. Oh, the Indiana Jones theme, dun 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 dun, dun. Like great use of it. The love theme that gets used in Raiders of the Lost Ark sounds very similar to Han and Leia's theme song, actually, just when you change just the rhythm of things.
I completely agree. It felt like it was just a variation of it, almost like a reprise.
But I think that's John Williams, how he captures love, because it works. It makes me believe that these two characters have some kind of romantic interest in one another. That without that music, it might seem like artificial or stale. You throw in John Williams' score, maybe it wasn't enough to save Hayden Christensen to be a love interest, but it sure works in these movies, all of them, even with Willie. I'll say, like, the scenes between them with the romantic theme, the motif that gets played, it just works in those moments. And when you appreciate the music, you can, I think, appreciate those scenes way more.
Yeah, I agree. You know, I'll tell you, the one thing that stood out to me about the music is, you know, obviously John Williams has some of the most iconic themes, period. I mean, in movie history. I mean, I don't think anybody would dispute he has some of the most iconic themes ever. But I think what really stood out to me was some of, like, the rhythmic and just background music in the adventure scenes, when a lot of the the woodblock just rhythms, right? Like, it just really kind of kept the cadence, kept the pace going. The use of, like, pizzicato strings, when they just pluck the strings and use that as their rhythm too, like, that sort of texture was perfect for this franchise. Like, he really enveloped the feeling of the movies and of the action and adventure in those kind of, like, those just backing tracks. Like, they're not themes, they're just here to provide texture to the scene. And that's what actually stood out to me more than anything else. Obviously the themes we know, but the texture of the scenes that it provided was, I thought, phenomenal. I thought that was the best.
Yeah, I really agree with that. I think it helped paint the picture of what you were seeing. It made it feel like you were really seeing what was happening in front of you, where you're wrapped up in this adventure. And I also think, just generally, like, on top of the fact that John Williams is a brilliant composer and he's very iconic and just has a way of coming up with these iconic themes, he also just knows how to place them. Like, you can tell how much work goes into him watching the movie and developing the music around that, and, like, seeing specific scenes and specific moments and placing the themes within those scenes and moments. Like, he just does such a great job of fitting it to what he's seeing, even when what we're seeing doesn't really live up to what we want. He still somehow elevates it. It's just incredible. It's really hard to say enough about John Williams, and any other series we do where we talk about a John Williams score is probably going to be similar things said about it.
It's always gonna be pretty gushing when you're talking about John Williams. But I think, to add to your point, I think you're absolutely right. And, like, he even envelops, like, the kind of, like, the waves of the theme and in the scene. Like, he puts the climax right where it needs to be. He puts the lull in the crescendo right where it needs to be. Like, it's pinpoint perfect. Like, there's just, I don't know, nobody else does it like him. I mean, it's incredible. I could say so much about John Williams. I just think he knocks it out of the park every time.
Yeah, I think it's sad that we don't get to have John Williams really much anymore in movies. Like, like, the man is definitely at, like, the end of his not only his career, but his life, potentially. So, like, to sit back and watch the franchise and hear John Williams' music, it's something that we are very fortunate to live in this time period where we have the pleasure of listening to his music.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I just think it's cool that he's, like, so devoted to Lucasfilm. Like, he'll just, like, do whatever George asks him to do. It's like, I got this cool movie, you want to do it?
Yeah.
Like, for decades he's done it.
Well, I think there's a level of wanting consistency from his standpoint too. He probably doesn't want to compose for a Star Wars movie or for an Indiana Jones movie and then have somebody else come in for the next one and maybe completely take it in a different direction than he did, which explains a lot like why he's still, for the Star Wars movies, composing the music for all of that. Other than Rogue One and Solo, he's still, for the main series, been doing it. And who else could you want for that? I mean, you have to keep it consistent within that. Just like with the characters in these movies and how iconic they are, you need that John Williams touch in there too to make it fully realize what it's supposed to be.
Yep. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
He's the maestro.
Absolutely. Is there anything else we want to touch on here? I mean, we've hit most of the major points that we set out to discuss here. I don't know if anyone has any extra thoughts, anything that's kind of just sticking out in your mind that you didn't get to say.
I want to defend the Crystal Skull because I feel bad for the movie and how much hate it's gotten. Because I definitely what?
Do you just like Shia LaBeouf?
Yeah, I don't dislike him. No. I don't dislike Shia LaBeouf. Nor
is that why you're defending the movie?
No. I'm defending the movie because it got like a lot of hate when it came out. And I remember watching it and not really liking it. But after rewatching it for the podcast as like a franchise, I was like, it's actually not that bad of a movie. It's really an amalgamation of all the other movies. And if you just imagine this movie taking place in the same time period of the 80s, I don't think you would get the same sort of pushback that people say about this movie. I think it does so many things that it fits perfectly into it. And Ted's point, I don't know if this was at the start or before we started recording, but he said like he didn't like it because he felt like it was how did you phrase it? Because I said the opposite way, but it was the same issue where I was like, this felt like so much of an Indiana Jones movie to me, and you felt like it was its problem, or how am I missing that?
Yeah, I think the problem with this movie is that more than any of the other movies, it played, and all of these movies do this, but it played so much more off of the fact that this was an Indiana Jones movie to its detriment. I felt like this movie just got worse and worse as it went on. And on top of playing to that to its detriment, it also had things that just don't make sense even in reality. And even though these are not based in reality, but I know that, but there's some semblance of reality. But things like the fact that Marion would have a child that she knows is Indy's and never mention a single thing to him until that child happens upon him and they all come together again. In no scenario is any woman going to get pregnant and then just say, I don't really want to burden that guy with the fact that he has a child.
No.
And then the flip of the script where he doesn't really care about what Mutt's doing until he finds out he's his son. And at that point, he's like, well, screw following your dreams. You got to do this and you got to do that. And like, it's funny in a way, but it's
because it's giving us
weird.
It's okay. I don't want to say I disagree, but I feel like it's being super nitpicky because then you can take that same fine-tooth comb that you just did with this movie and you do it to all of the other ones. But because the older ones are nostalgic and are rooted in culture and all of this, that we just allow it to get a pass. Because
this is the first time I've seen the franchise and I couldn't agree more with Ted.
There's really no nostalgia value for these movies for me, and we talked about it at the top. I don't think
it plays into it. Like I think like you don't. I'm not saying, because I don't think any of them are really good movies. Like I did not like find myself being like, I want to watch these again and again. I was like, wow, I watched these and I probably won't ever watch them again, but I can appreciate some of the things. And that's why I'm defending this one, is because when you look at all of them, I don't think it's the worst one. By far, I don't think it's the worst one. The worst one I think is The Last Crusade. I think it's too many weird things. The first sequence in it, we're getting a flashback all of a sudden to like Kid Indiana Jones, and it's bad. Like it's not even like good. It just doesn't fit. And then all of a sudden, like then it gets better later on. But Crystal Skull fits the same model as number 1 and number 3, at least with how its plot develops. And I think that it captures all the things that happened in the previous 3. And it was kind of, if you think of it as a standalone movie to kind of like wrap up the original trilogy, which was like what are they called? Not really like remakes of movies, but when they bring back a franchise after a while. A reboot. Soft reboot. But this was, I don't think, ever intended to launch something new, but rather close off the original trilogy. You bring back...
You sure about that? You see the ending scene of this movie where the hat blows into Mutt's hands?
But he picks...
Seems like
no. But it's even better. And I think it counters the point you're going to make. He doesn't get it. Indy takes it and walks off, and fucking Shia LaBeouf at the end stands there, lets everyone else leave, and he's the last one to leave the church, like without the hat on. And it's like, oh, I guess you don't get your adventure.
Guess you're never going to see Shia LaBeouf in a Jones movie again.
Because the idea was to end it. So like, I hate it for the movie, but when I look at all of them together, I don't hate it. I don't hate it one bit.
I'm not saying I hate it, but it's the weakest of all of them.
It's the weakest.
In this movie, I started watching it and thought, maybe it's not as bad as I thought it was. But the more it went on, the more it proved me wrong. It just sequence after sequence between the CGI, between the just harebrained logic in it. Like, again, not logical movies. I'm not trying to get too deep into that stuff, but between the whole thing with Mutt being his son, and suddenly Marion and Indy are super lovey-dovey, even though they've been separated for so long. And like his whole, it's always been you, babe, even though there have been plenty in between and before. It just doesn't play.
Well, he admits
no
it.
Sense.
I disagree. I can't believe I'm having to defend it this way, but I feel like
you don't have to. You shouldn't do it
because I just don't feel that way at all about this movie. Well, if our role as podcasters is to talk about franchises, I'm going to stick up for this one poor movie in the film because the franchise, because I feel like it gets way unnecessary hate based on.
I will defend it in one sense. A lot of people get super upset about the nuclear explosion with the fridge scene.
Oh, yeah.
And I felt compelled to look this up. I'm like, they had to have gotten this from somewhere. Because one thing these movies do very well is, even though they're fictional, they do set these movies up in some realm of reality. If you think back to Raiders of the Lost Ark, I don't know necessarily if the Nazis were after the Ark of the Covenant in reality, but they were after a lot of
relics and things
that were built in within like Christianity mythology, stuff like that. Like the Spear of Destiny was something that Hitler was super enthralled with and like literally wanted. So like they do sprinkle in actual facts with these things, and I always thought that was interesting. So in this movie, I had to look it up, and apparently Frigidaire fridges were lined with lead, and there was actually a nuclear test done in one of these like fake communities like that with the dummies. And even though the fridge ended up sustaining damage on the outside, it had actual food in it, and the food was undamaged. And they did a tracing of how much radiation it had, and it had no signs of any radiation. So like, it's not the least plausible thing that he could have survived it. He probably would have been more likely to die from just being jarred around within a fridge a bunch of times during an explosion, just tossed around. So it's not that bad, that scene in particular. That one gets a bad rap. That's the only thing I'll defend, though.
That's fair. I won't push the point too far. I just feel like with logic in movies like this, remember the first one deals with the Ark of the Covenant. The second one has a man have his beating heart ripped out and he still lives. And the third one deals with a cup that either gives you immortality or kills you. So you gotta, you can't draw lines in the sand. I do think it's fair.
I think that because we consider this such a grounded franchise, meaning it's like a sci-fi movie that's not in space, right? I mean, like we watch a lot of sci-fi, that it's not out of the ordinary. It's not unbelievable. Like, but there's a lot of things in it that are supposed to be, you know, sci-fi elements to it. You know,
Yeah,
and
but
that's not the my criticism for the movie, really.
That's not even the argument I was making. I was just making an argument against like the things that are more grounded in reality weren't very grounded in reality. The things that should be. I have no problem with the mystical elements of it, other than the fact that, and it can be argued in all these movies, but especially in this movie, the Crystal Skull was like the biggest MacGuffin, I think, of all the movies, because it just saved them from a bunch of things. Like, they had to find that in the beginning of the movie because it saved them from the ants. It ended up saving them in the case.
But they don't find it in the beginning of the movie. They find it pretty far into it.
I'd say like a quarter in.
First third, though, right?
Yeah, it wasn't too far into the movie. It was
first
certainly
act, second act, maybe. Maybe the beginning of the second act.
No, it's like the third act. I feel like I'm gonna go back and check these timestamps for some of the things we've talked about, because I feel like when you're in a movie, you lose track of like how much time you watch it, and I pay like I try to pay a lot of attention to how long we're in things for. Like I'll move my mouse to see like how much time has passed, to see, because I think you get lost. An action sequence, go back to our last podcast example with The Matrix. Those action sequences were so freaking long. So I don't think like people realize how long they were until you go back and you look. It was like a 20-minute sequence, which is like unheard of. Like a sequence should be like 13 minutes. Like that's usually like a long sequence. These were 20 minutes. So I'm gonna go back and verify timestamps with some of these things.
Yeah, I think it's earlier than you think it is, but
yeah. But either way, go for it. I'm not gonna watch these movies again.
Yeah, I don't think I'll revisit them, but like I said, I did have fun with them. I think the one thing that stood out to me most about all of these movies, and it's not out of the ordinary for movies of its time or movies of similar genre, but everything was a convenience. I mean, every fortune or misfortune that Indy had was part of a convenience, you know, whether it was for or against him. Like that, it just always just happened to be there. It just happens to come across this, and like, so again, I don't think it's uncommon for movies of its, you know, of similar types, but literally everything was a convenience. So I just found that kind of funny. Yeah. The other thing, did you guys realize, back to Crystal Skull, did you hear the Star Wars line?
Oh, yeah. I got a bad feeling about this.
I got a bad feeling about this.
Yeah.
Speaking of other homages, in Temple of Doom, there's a scene where first there's an homage to the original sword fight in Last Crusade, which is kind of funny, especially knowing now that it's a prequel to it, but there's another scene where Indy shoots a guy wielding a sword. But then there's also one where he starts chasing guys, but they actually don't take to it, kind of like Han does in A New Hope, where he chases the stormtroopers like a maniac. In Temple of Doom, he starts chasing his enemies, but they're just like, the fuck are you doing? And then he starts running away from them, which was just a fun thing that I noticed in this. And maybe I'm making too much of it, but at least to me, it seemed like those were homages.
No, I agree. To be honest, I feel like we could do, like, if we really wanted to dive into Indiana Jones, which frankly I'm not that interested in, but you could probably find like a whole episode, like a podcast episode worth of Easter eggs in these movies.
Yeah. There's like
because they're
R2-D2
really,
and C-3PO are like hieroglyphics somewhere.
Like a drawing. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot that like I would have to watch again and again to really get, but there's a lot of homages between the Spielberg and Lucas universes.
I feel like there could be, like, if Lucasfilm, now that they're owned by Disney, starts making more movies for them, they could have almost like not a shared universe, but like they could do this more often in their franchises, where if Lucasfilm came out with a brand new one, let's say next year, they could throw in elements from all of the other Lucasfilm franchises and we as fans would appreciate it because we know that's like Lucasfilm doing their little like, oh, look at that, we saw the Indiana Jones whip or hat hanging on the wall or something like that in that one scene.
Yeah, they're like Pixar.
Yes,
but better. Well, I don't even know. I don't think better is quite subjective, and I don't think that's true, actually.
Yeah, there's a pretty good argument to be made that Pixar actually makes better quality movies overall.
Yeah. I thought about it for half a second, and I don't think what I said was right.
All right, before we run out of time, can we, if not going to speculate about what the fifth Indiana Jones movie is going to be, but what would we like want to see in
So
Indiana
we
Jones
know
5?
we know it's supposed to be directed by James Mangold, Kathleen Kennedy, obviously EP. Now I don't know if that tells you anything about the movie itself, but just a caveat before we get into it. James Mangold.
Yeah, what
director?
What does he do?
Logan, probably the biggest one.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of some other movies of his.
He was slated to do something else that I heard about, but I can't remember. Oh, he did Ford versus Ferrari.
Yep, looking at some of his movies. Okay, so we're getting like a good mix of like action and like fun, exciting types of movies. Lots of like male characters with probably female love interests in them. I see like Walk the Line and Night and Day, Tom Cruise movie on there. So like, okay, I think I want to see then Indiana Jones having to, because we know Harrison Ford is going to be in it. I don't want to see 78-year-old Harrison Ford running around. So I want to see him more probably like what his dad was in The Last Crusade, to be the MacGuffin, and that someone else needs Indiana Jones for the first time. So whereas Indiana Jones kind of becomes like they only want him to get after the thing that they really want, but in this case, like he will be the actual like MacGuffin personality that they're going for. And I want that person to be short, to be the new archaeologist or whatever. That probably won't happen. But I want it to, without taking away what the Crystal Skull did. But hopefully this is used to wrap up the franchise as a whole, where it brings in elements from everything. I want that fan service of touching upon everything to really show unity for this franchise.
I can see where you're coming from, but I think that Indiana Jones is or could be a forever serial. Like, I almost think that they could kind of like reboot it, maybe with the new Indiana Jones, but like keep the series going. Like, it's so episode or monster of the week, adventure of the week type, movie or storytelling, that they could really set up something to continue to make new movies out of the Indiana Jones franchise, or token. So that's what I would like to see. Something with a little more set up for the future. I mean, they need to make a pivot from Star Wars, at least for a little while. So why not Indiana Jones? At least Lucasfilm is what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So soft reboot, essentially.
Yeah, sort of. Just better than the last one.
Well, I don't think the last one was a soft reboot.
It wasn't.
So I've got sort of a pitch for the movie.
Okay,
all right,
even better.
So first scene, Indy's in a nursing home with Marion. And
okay, this is good.
In comes Short Round. I'm bringing Short Round back to appease nerds like you guys who, for some reason, like him. Get that nostalgia factor in there. Get the fanboys excited about it. And Short Round's an adult, and he's recruiting Indy for one last adventure. So he breaks him out of the nursing home. And the whole movie, Indy's on a walker, but he's still managing it. And I don't know what they're after, doesn't really matter. But they go on the grand adventure. It's wonderful. All the usual things happen, but it's even more stuff happening that is just pure luck, because Indy should just be back in his nursing home. He has no business doing any of this. Then there's going to be a wonderful scene where he's actually swinging from vines with monkeys, but using his walker to swing from the vines. And I'll just skip right to the end here. So that they find the thing, save the day, everything's good. come to find out, Indy was in a coma the entire time in the hospital. Marion was next to him holding his hand. It's a very sweet moment. And, she's contemplating whether or not to pull the plug. And
Jesus.
yeah. And roll credits.
I didn't know where that was going, but that went someplace.
Yeah, so it is Indy going on one more big adventure. And
the Shyamalan twist.
Absolutely. But what better way for him to go out, especially when he's in that vulnerable, real position? So we mix reality with a little bit of fantasy.
Could it all take place in the suburbs of Connecticut? Just like he's on a scooter.
Yeah.
Just riding the streets.
No, can we go
Absolutely.
like one like weird level deeper than that though? To be like, what if it's like taking place in the Star Wars universe as like someone's dream, like they're waking up from or something like that? Like it's Luke Skywalker and like it's Aunt Beru saying, Luke, come get your breakfast, and like he wakes up.
It sounds like a nerdy 35-year-old's nightly dream.
Yes.
Well, that's essentially what it's supposed to be. That's what the coma lends itself to. We can cram in a bunch of other references to Harrison Ford characters, where there's a scene where they're on a plane together, and right after Short Round says that there's not enough parachutes, they're fighting a guy, and Harrison Ford, while knocking a guy out of the plane, says, "Get off my plane," for no reason.
Hey, listen, I stand Short Round.
I don't
I'm
agree.
in for Short Round. I think
That's
here's my pitch. Next movie, Short Round comes back and kills Indiana Jones.
Kills him
for selling him to a slave trader. Which is why
You're going super dark here.
Which is why we don't see him in Raiders, the sequel to Temple of Doom.
So you're going for the dark, soft reboot.
Ooh,
Yeah,
okay, I like that.
That's my new pitch.
I thought mine was a little dark, but yours goes a step further there.
Well, he's in the nursing home and he strangles him with his O2 hose.
Yeah, he
That's how he
disguises
does it.
himself as a nurse and goes in there and takes out Indy.
Yep.
Yikes.
Me and James Mangold, we got this.
Hell yeah.
Hey Ted, what are we gonna do on the podcast next?
Well, we discussed it prior to the episode, and we were thinking Hunger Games would be a good one. You mentioned, Andy, I remember that we hadn't really dived into anything YA, and that there was a lot in the mid-2000s to late 2010s that, attempting to do the YA stuff, piggybacking off of Harry Potter, Twilight, that kind of thing. So yeah, it might be interesting.
I'd be down to it.
I wonder, did Hunger Games come out before or after Twilight?
I think after, or
Definitely.
maybe the last Twilight hadn't come out by the time the first Hunger Games came out. I don't even know.
Hunger Games,
No.
the movie came out in 2012.
Yeah.
Twilight came out
I think
in
that must have been before.
it's like 2008 or 2009. 2008. Yeah.
Hunger Games it is. That'll be fun.
Hunger
Yeah, I'm
Games.
so glad we chose that before this episode.
Yeah, glad we got that out of the way for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's one that I really have zero experience with. So that'll be kind of. Do you guys have you guys read or seen them at
I
all?
read the first book, and I think I've seen the first two movies.
Haven't read, and I think I've watched like snippets of the first movie and only like the very beginning of it, not even really into it. Don't know how it ends.
Interesting. All right, that'll be fun. I think that's one that we really have. I don't think any of us have really much experience at all. So that'll be kind of cool to dive into.
I know
So
more
cool,
about
so that's-
memes than I do about the movies.
Yeah, right. Lots of memes. So that's our homework for next time.
All right. Well, with that said, thanks for joining us, everybody. I really enjoyed at least diving into these movies. They weren't the best, like we discussed, but they were fun, and we've got some context for a lot of pop culture imagery and iconography now because of watching all these Indiana Jones movies. So it definitely something we had to watch, and it was good to get it out of the way. Very fun.
Should we start rating franchises 1 to 5? Out of 5 stars.
3.
Andy,
2.5.
I was gonna go 3.
Yeah,
So
right around
all
the same area.
solid. I like it. All right, guys. Good chat.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thanks, all.
Peace out.
See you on the next one.
Bye, guys.
Cut.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, find us on most podcast platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Follow us on Twitter @FranchiseFlix for new episodes and other content. You can follow Andy on Twitch and Instagram @DarthBuckman and follow Zach on Twitter @_Zach Russo. Talk to you next time.